Recently, I was hired by the US federal government for an IT specialist position at the GS-12 grade, and I was actually able to negotiate a little bit of a higher starting step right before I got on board. And as proud as I am of this achievement, it actually was a very long time in coming. It took me just about 3 years and more than 120 applications to break through what seemingly is this impenetrable fortress that is the federal government. So I want to, in this video, offer you kind of a comprehensive overview of what the process was like for me, so that if you're also interested in working for the government, that hopefully helps you be a little bit more prepared and gives you an idea of what to expect. So to start off, I do want to give you a glimpse into what my qualifications are, because your success is going to depend heavily on that. But obviously I can't go too much in depth for security concerns. So I can say that I do have an undergraduate and graduate degree in tech fields. I have a little bit of private industry experience. But I think what carried the most weight were two things. Number one, an existing security clearance, and number two, veterans preference. I think that one actually stood out the most. And if you're not familiar with what that is, you can look it up, but it's essentially where if you serve some time in the military, which I have, then you kind of jump to the front of the line when you're being considered by prospective employers. But with that set aside, let's go and talk about what the process looks like from start to finish in general. Sometimes it does vary, but usually it follows a relatively predictable pattern. So the first step is to set up an account on USAJOBS.com. Some agencies have their own processes and systems, but for the vast majority of agencies out there, they post their openings on USAJOBS. So a few tips I want to offer here. Number one, when it comes to your federal resume, that's going to be drastically different from a private sector resume. So whereas private sector is usually one page and you have to be as concise as possible, federal is the exact opposite. You have to be as detailed as possible. So you have to include things like hours worked, salary, supervisor, their contact information, location, and I even had a separate paragraph, not just bullets, but paragraph each for responsibilities followed by accomplishments. Also, don't forget to include technical skills, projects you might have worked on. Also, in addition to your resume, most federal agencies, in the vast majority of cases, they're going to require more than just your resume. They're going to require what they call a self-assessment questionnaire, where they're going to ask you something like 30 to 40 questions on that application form regarding your expertise as it pertains to various areas of the job. And so one thing to note here is that because of the high volume of questions and applicants, it's highly likely that there's a system that's assigning you an automatic rank against other applicants rather than it being an individual human being looking at each and every single one of those questions. So just ask yourself, what's worse? Being modest and then possibly getting a low ranking and not even getting an interview, or exaggerating a little bit and at least getting an interview and possibly getting rejected from there, in which case you get a little bit of experience, or at least having a chance of progressing a little bit further in the process. And I'll leave it to your imagination to decide which is the better option. And the last bit of application advice I have is fire and forget. That is, as soon as you're done submitting an application, forget about it. Don't fixate on it and stress about the fact that you haven't heard anything back, because the process is a very long one. It takes anywhere from 9 months to an entire year, if not more than that, to make it from submitting an application to actually sitting at a desk and starting your first day of work. And that's if you even hear back, because at least in my case, I didn't hear back from a good 90% of the more than 120 applications that I submitted. So it's really not worth stressing out over that. The next part of the process, if you're lucky, is going to be your interview. And if you're even luckier, you'll hear back about that, inviting you to interview within maybe 2 months of you applying. Of course, I can't go into detail about what kinds of questions I've been asked in interviews, but I can say that at a high level, I've not really ever been caught off guard with any of the questions I've been asked during an interview. So I'd say that any interview guide that's available to the public will help you prepare for those things. They're not by any stretch of the imagination easy, but again, there's nothing that's just otherworldly about them. Usually the interviews I've done have been panels. I've not really, to my recollection, had a one-on-one interview. And in most cases, it's just been one interview. After that, in some cases, not all, but some, you might be asked to provide references. Now, this is a good sign because it means you're steadily moving forward, and it definitely means you've passed the interview. So the piece of advice I have for you here is make sure you have references prepared far in advance. So before you even start applying for jobs, make sure you ask people in your professional network, at least 3 to 6 people, if they'd be willing to act as references for you so that you don't have to scramble at the last minute. And on that note, responsiveness is of the utmost importance. This applies to any stage of the process because it already takes a long time. So if you're going to get an email and then wait a week to realize that you've even gotten it, then you're adding unnecessary delays to the process. And sometimes they will even attach deadlines. So if you miss that window of opportunity, then you've potentially missed out on an actual job opportunity. So I recommend setting up notifications on your phone so you know exactly when you're getting these emails and you respond to them as quickly as you possibly can. After reference checks, if you do pass them, then you'll be extended what's known as a tentative offer of employment or a conditional offer. And for me, the process took maybe about 2 weeks or so between when I was asked for references and when I was extended my tentative offer. But the key word here is tentative or conditional, as in they can be rescinded at any point in time for any reason. So it's not at all in any way, shape, or form a guarantee of employment. So a few pieces of advice here. For one, don't get your hopes up because you will be disappointed in most cases when that invariably is going to happen. Also, don't announce it under any circumstances. Don't tell anybody, especially on a public forum like social media, that you essentially have this job offer, because at a minimum, it's going to be very embarrassing if it does get rescinded. And perhaps most importantly, don't stop your life. Don't quit your job and uproot yourself or your family and move somewhere else thinking that you're going to get this job, because if it does get rescinded again, you're just going to kind of be SOL at that point. Just remember, you never truly actually have the job until you're actually showing up to work on the first day and you've made it through that first day. So really, throughout this entire process, you should be continually applying to other agencies under the assumption or the expectation that you're not going to get any of these jobs until that entrance on duty date. But at the same time, because they're so unreliable, it's 100% okay to accept multiple conditional offers at the same time if you're lucky enough to get them. Now, I talked about salary negotiations earlier. If anyone's ever told you that the government does not negotiate, that's mostly a myth. Sometimes they say no, but sometimes, in many cases, at least in my experience, they do say yes. So always negotiate for a higher salary because you pretty much have nothing to lose. The worst you'll get told is no. After you've accepted your tentative offer, then you'll be asked to do a multitude of things. I've been asked to do anything from taking a medical exam to a drug test, doing fingerprinting, but most notably the background investigation and security clearance process. So even if the position doesn't require a clearance, I'm fairly certain that you're always going to have to do a background investigation. And it's a pretty self-explanatory process. But one thing I wanted to talk on, I did mention earlier that I had an existing clearance coming into the position, and that turned out to be a huge advantage for me because I was granted what's called reciprocity, where some federal agencies will recognize the existing background investigation that you already had for your existing clearance and just turn it into their own as long as it's on the same level of clearance that they require for that position. And for me, the turnaround between the paperwork being submitted for the reciprocity request to it actually being granted was roughly just under 2 weeks. And the last step of the process, if you've made it through all that, is to receive your final offer of employment. That's where it's a little bit more set in stone, but still remember, just like anything else, you still don't have the job until you've shown up to the first day of work. And in my case, between getting the final offer and actually showing up to work, it was just about 3 weeks. So again, keep applying and keep assuming that anything can happen and you're not guaranteed employment until you've made it to that first day. So while that was kind of a quick overview, some of those topics could be entirely separate videos by themselves. And I do have some more videos planned for the future, so let me know if you have any questions and I'll try to address them later on. Also, if you're interested in general life coaching and self-improvement, I have a separate channel which I'll link down below. So thanks for watching and I'll see you next time.